I get asked a lot, what is this term prizing? And isn't that just the same thing as praising kids? And that is a main reason why I wrote it, was because, there's a lot of research that says that there are things about praise that, aren't necessarily always ideal for kids. And then there's what I personally experienced from a number of individuals growing up that seemed to, even at the time, it felt like it was different than the praise I was receiving from people. Things like, oh, kiddo, you're so smart, you get such good grades, you're such a good boy, you're so creative. All it felt good, but it wasn't necessarily always feeling good. Sometimes it felt like pressure when I was little. And then there were times where I would feel an adult in particular, sometimes a teacher, as I wrote about in the book, a scoutmaster at one point, where they seemed to just really drop into the moment with me. And they seemed to be very, very interested in letting me know that what I was experiencing in that moment really mattered to them. And it was clear to me, even as a kid, that their own worries, their own agendas, maybe they wanted me to do something differently, but in that moment, it didn't matter as much as letting me know that what was going on for me was what really mattered to them. And I think that's what, this book is really about, is that distinction between praise as usual that can feel good, but maybe have some side effects like pressure or feeling like you can't always meet that standard, or that you have to do certain things in order for the adult to give you more of that, versus prizing, which is, and this is the piece that isn't in the book, I always have this image. It's like a bonfire in a clearing surrounded by woods at night. And the adult has made this bonfire, and it's the only source of light, and it's the only source of warmth. And the kid is standing on the fringe of the dark of the forest. And that maybe they're scared, maybe they're angry, maybe they're, doubting themselves, something that they're struggling with. And the adult is just sitting by that fire, and they motion for the kid to come over, but they don't try and force them. They don't try to manipulate them. They just say, it's warm and there's light here by the fire, and if you want to come have a seat with me, that would be amazing. And there's no pressure. And I think of that image, and it does take me back to Boy Scouts. We did that sort of thing when I was a kid. And that's an image that I have in my mind these days as to what prizing is. It's about sitting down, dropping in, being really present in the moment with kids. And you're dropping any agenda of trying to make that child do anything. And you're just letting them know that their experience really, really matters to you.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I think I'll carry that campfire image for a long time. It's beautiful, because when a kid's on the edge of the campfire like that, it's hard, right? It's one of the things that you've heard me say before, Mitch, is that it's not about disorientation. It's not about disobedience. You've heard me say this before. I just don't believe in disobedience. I don't believe in it, and I've been a school counselor, family counselor. I've met some right little rotters, I can tell you, like real little buggers, but I don't believe any of them are being disobedient. What they're being is disoriented.
Yeah.
And it's a really, I'm not playing with semantics here, but that image of the campfire is a child's outside that, and they're kind of disoriented, and they don't know, should they move away from this? Should they come towards it? But if we know that they're disoriented and they may be lost in the woods,
Yes.
and they've come upon this person sitting around that metaphoric campfire, they can move towards that and become oriented, because that's what they're looking for. That's when kids, because being disoriented, don't you think it's one of the most, it's a very unsettling, it's one of the most almost painful psychological states a child or a human being can be in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when I first heard you say that, Kim, when we first chatted about, instead of disobedient, disoriented, that really resonated with me. I think we've had some shared similar clinical experience, and that's a big piece of where my thinking has come from. As I like to say, prizing has been the sum total of my treatment plan for decades now. Because that's really at the core what kids, it's like a nutrient that kids really need. They need, and to use your wording, they need someone to help orient them, not make them, not try to force something, not try to control an outcome, but just give them a compass heading, and then they can show up to their own truth, their own needs. But yeah, I think working with really challenging kid, teen, and adult populations over the years has really, because prizing is different, because it's not just about the good stuff. Praise, we talk about praise as kids done a good behavior. Prizing is something that you can show up to even when the kid's being a bugger. Right? They're being naughty, they're being disobedient, they're being disruptive. And then I hear echoes of like Carl Rogers and whatnot in here, right? There's something behind that behavior. There's a kid that's disoriented, there's a kid in pain, and in my hundreds of kids I've worked with, there was a child behind that was afraid or sad or, not trusting the adults in their lives. They've been hurt. There was some pain point, and then they crusted that over with the behavior that is very provocative and draws a lot of attention, but that's just the surface. Beyond that and behind that is where the real money is. That's the prize, is what's behind.
I've been thinking lately, after our last conversation about empathy, because we mentioned that a little bit, and about, I was thinking, empathy is really a big thing to have for a child. It's a feeling, but compassion is empathy in action.
Yes.
Compassion is an action. Empathy is a feeling.
Yeah.
And so it starts with empathy, but it can move into action if we move into that prizing space.
Yeah, there's so much in there.
Yeah.
There's so much in there. And I can't help but jump in my mind to some of the other research that's been done that is pointed to the limits and the side effects of empathy in terms of how it often gets manifested in behavior that reactively comes out of it. And this applies heavily with parents, in my experience, my own personal experience, that your brain is wired to go into an empathy reaction, that felt state of their pain, becoming a bit of your pain. And then what the research is saying is that you go into kind of a tunnel vision and you lose track of more of what actually is in a given moment. And you can, in our field, we would call it a parent or another person can over-identify with that pain of the other. And that can lead to reactive behavior. It can lead to overdoing for the child instead of them doing for themselves more. Compassion, I agree. It flows into action. It flows into a different form of action that's way more spacious and has an inherent we-ness. The word compassion, compassion literally means with pain, not of pain. And I think there's something, the research supports it. Clinically, it's been the case for me that if I can be present, but not in my eye, like, my ego is threatened or I have to fix this for them. It's more like we are in this situation and there's all of this that is happening. This is the action that fits. Empathy sometimes leads to the action that doesn't actually fit the needs of the child and the needs of the moment. There's just so much there that I think that this book is really more about the adult than it is about the kid. It's for the kids, but it's for the adult to practice inside out, being able to adopt the skills of that curiosity, that wondering. Because I agree with you, it does lead to a completely different state and then behavior toward the child.
When I read through the book, Mitch, today for a second time, because I knew we were talking, one of the things that came up for me is with praising versus prizing, is that in the 80s, I was looking at one of the things that I wrote about in one of the books I wrote was I did a bit of a survey. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, but I did a bit of a survey of discipline fads over the decades. And I just accessed the Library of Congress, and I also looked at big selling parenting books from the 60s, 70s, 80s. And there's basically been this swing from the sort of more liberal left to the more conservative, tight, pull it all in right. I don't mean that, by the way, politically. I just mean there's been these swings. And one of the swings from the 70s was kids need to express them. Late 60s, 70s, kids need to express themselves. They need to be free spirits and so on. And it was getting for many parents felt that was getting out of whack, right? So along comes Skinner and behavior modification in the 80s, B.F. Skinner. And it was all about reward and punishment. So it was all about privileges, removal of privileges. So kids didn't do what it was right and what came out of the values of the family. They did what was advantageous, right? So it just basically turned kids into expert negotiators.
Yes.
They would negotiate better privileges.
Right.
But what it reminded me in the prizing book is that then we had the 90s, which was behavior management, where the kids were the workers, we were the managers. But honestly, if you got 2 or 3 kids and they're the workers, you're a manager, not a parent, the kids will unionize, right? And
right.
They did. And so there was another swing, and it was a swing back to the right. Now, praise, and this is what I was wanting to ask you about, is that praising, not prizing, but praising seemed to me to be sugar-coated behavior modification.
Yes.
Do you think, because Skinner, it was reward and punishment, but really in the 80s, it was about removal of privileges.
Right.
It wasn't so much about, it ended up like that. But praising, and as you write about it in your book, praising, it still seems very controlling. It still seems like there is a hidden motivation. And what makes praising, as you describe it in the book, more worrisome, even insidious, is that it seems nice.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
What do you think about that? It's sugar-coated behavior mod.
In my own training and, working with kids really struggling with behavior, it's not even sugar-coated. This is the intention. The intention is to shape, operant conditioning, shape behavior toward more adaptive, positive, desired behavior that the adult wants. So there becomes this contingency management. I will praise you more, and I will be very specific. I saw that behavior. That behavior is awesome. Do more of that. And what I've experienced is some kids seem to respond to that. I wonder if sometimes they respond to that well because what they really are wanting and needing is that attunement, which is what prizing gives. And yet I've experienced this many, many times that kids, particularly kids that have really had awful histories, and they have a self narrative that is full of less than on their part and full of not trust on the adult's part. They feel that manipulation or that contingency, do more of that, and then I will give you more of this positive praise. I've seen kids immediately push back on that praise. And I'm sure you've seen that too, and actually I've seen kids fold up and shut down. I've seen them argue. I've seen them act out. And it's not that they never would with true prizing. I think in my direct experience, kids feel it for what it is. They feel the authenticity and what I call in the book, the 0 point that the parent or the adult has dropped into. And by 0 point, I mean your only agenda is speaking to the truth of the experience in the child. Your only agenda is the we. Your only agenda is connection. There's, to have it be truly prizing, there's no agenda beyond that moment, which would include the moment of a more desirable behavior from the kid. I think most kids, even kids with significant challenges, can feel that degree of authentic intention. And I think it does something entirely more than what praise typically, as it's done, can do in a child. I think it frees a child to actually encounter their experience more fully. And then they show up at that fireside.
It's a little, it reminded me, again, I was just making some notes upon notes in the margin of the book today. And I was thinking about the difference between like what is classically done with distraction when a kid's not doing well and you just get the feeling and you try and you redirect them, as opposed to what I think of as we direct with a W, not an R. A redirect is saying to a child, Georgie, why don't you go and play with your puzzle? Hey, why don't you go play outside? Georgie, why don't you go and just find something to do, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that is actually a form of, like, when a child's not doing well, they need a we direction, like a we, come closer to me because you're disoriented. And prizing is about, it's about, as you just mentioned now, it's funny you mentioned that, Mitch, because I wrote that down in the book. I'm looking right at it. Is about we, because it's a like a we direction is, Georgie, come on over and sit with me while I make the salad, and I want to tell you about when Grandma was a little girl. Oh my goodness, did I ever tell you about the time she fell into the river? Right there, your we
difference. Yes.
You're bringing a child to the campfire. You're bringing them in just at a point when they're disoriented, as opposed to redirecting. And redirecting can work sometimes, but a child's always going to go off and like, I don't want to ride my stupid bike.
Yes.
Whatever. And off they go. But it feels like a form, basically a subtle form of rejection-based discipline.
Right.
You're not doing what I want you to do, so I'm going to go off and do something else. Don't be around me. As opposed to, come on over and here, come help me do this. Come help. I want to tell you something. Come and have a look at this. And even with teenagers, not just little kids,
Right.
Come on over and sit at the counter, love, and just be critical of what I'm cooking.
Yes.
I'm not making that one up, by the way.
It didn't sound like it.
And it got a smile out of her. It got a smile because she was saying, not soup again. Oh my goodness. and I was making soup, right? And I said, come on, okay, come on over and just sit at the counter with me. That kind of we directing, as opposed to like it's we as opposed to go away, it struck me that that's one of the, like it's a narrative arc running through the book.